Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Bill Dodd and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. We've got a lot to cover in this week's episode. However, before we get into what's happening in the markets this week, we'd like to take some time to address some upcoming deadlines related to agricultural pandemic assistance programs. These include the second iteration of the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, Pandemic Livestock Indemnity Program, and Pandemic Assistance for Timber Harvesters and Haulers. The CFAP2 program application deadline is set for October 12th. This program is intended to assist with agricultural commodities marketed in 2020 that faced market disruptions due to COVID-19. While many producers have already submitted their applications, there have been some additional program updates that specifically impact livestock and poultry contract growers and sales-based commodities that you should know about.
Yeah, with CFAP2, USDA did recently announce some program updates for two groups of applicants under that program. The sales commodity group, so that's like dry edible beans, pullets, fruits and vegetables, and wool. Anybody who had an application under that sales commodity category, they are allowing you to use 2018 revenue as a representative year in that payment formula compared to 2019. And so it's an option for you as someone who applied before to use that 2018 number instead of 2019. There is also another category. So contract producers also, there was an update to policy associated with contract producers as well. And so for those who previously applied as a contract producer and under those categories, we're talking about contract producers of broilers and pullets, turkeys, swine falls under that. You may also want to contact FSA to see about the formula update for payments related to CFAP2.
Pandemic Livestock Indemnity Program, or PLIP applications, are also due by October 12th. It's important to keep in mind that you should retain any documentation of loss for the possibility of future reference.
The county office will work with them on all the specifics about what they will need to have on hand. It may not be so much as a matter of turning in documentation as making sure that you have that documentation available in the event that you have some spot checks later on. So, for producers who made that difficult decision to do some depopulation during that time, they'll definitely want to talk to their FSA office about the specifics that they'll need to complete that application and get that in ahead of the October 12 deadline for that PLIP program.
Finally, applications for PATH, or Pandemic Assistance for Timber Harvesters and Haulers, will be due by October 15th. Through this program, individual loggers, truckers, or legal entities could be eligible for up to $125,000 in financial assistance. As the timber industry in Nebraska isn't quite to the same scale as most agricultural operations in the state, it's also a group that doesn't have frequent contact with the FSA and may not even be aware of this opportunity.
The timber industry in Nebraska isn't huge, but there are some individuals that obviously do that here in certain sectors of Nebraska. And so we just wanted to make sure folks knew about the PATH program. They're not necessarily folks that normally come into our offices. And so just trying to spread the word about its availability ahead of the October 15th deadline for applications.
To recap, the application deadlines for Coronavirus Food Assistance Program 2, or CFAP2, is set for October 12th. Likewise, the Pandemic Livestock Indemnity Program, or PLIP application deadline is also October 12th. And the application deadline for Pandemic Assistance for Timber Harvesters and Haulers, or PATH, is set for October 15th. These dates are fast approaching, so be sure to take the time to get these applications turned in before you miss out on any of these opportunities. If you have any questions or concerns pertaining to these programs, you're encouraged to contact your local FSA office. Moving on, last week the USDA released its quarterly hogs and pigs report revealing some eye-opening numbers. Joining me now to discuss the report is Iowa State livestock economist Dr. Lee Schulz. Lee, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Well, let's get started by getting into the fact that the report looked a bit bullish, showing signs of further contraction as hog and pig inventories were down 4% from September 1st of 2020, but up 1% from June of 2021. Can I get your thoughts on those numbers?
Well, after the roller coaster ride we've really seen over the last year plus in inventories, I think it's difficult to say that things are much of a surprise, but this one certainly was. It was big bullish. When you look at really across the board, numbers were down. They were below pre-report expectations. I think to put a bit of context, we usually benchmark it year over year, but also month over month. And when you look year over year, we were lower. Usually the September inventory is the largest within a year, just given seasonal fluctuations in inventory. But we actually seen the numbers down for the number of breeding herd, which was a bit of a surprise. Not coincidentally, the last time we seen a lower September compared to June sow inventory was back in 2013 when we had much higher feed costs. So that this report was certainly bullish. Another factor was that USDA came in and made some major revisions. They brought down the December-February pig crop. This last December-February pig crop down 3.9%. That really now matched what we've seen for slaughter levels this summer. And so I think really over the board, I think we're looking at much lower inventories here in the short term and as we look forward.
And Lee, the report also showed the summer pig crop coming in down 6% from last summer. How do you see this impacting any winter contracts?
Well, we seen it right away on Monday after the report. The December and February contracts were limit up. As you looked further into April, May contracts, they were up over $4 per hundredweight. And progressively, we've seen contracts really up across the board. Then Tuesday, right before we recorded this, contracts were up again. Wasn't limit, but still up. So I think we're still reacting to the tighter inventories. I think there was expectations that we would see those tighter inventories, but it's even tighter. And so I think that's why we're all changing our supply forecast. We're changing our price forecast, given these new inventory estimates.
So Lee, big picture here, what was your overall takeaway from this report, and what are you going to be watching in the market as the next several weeks play out?
Well, I think as we started this segment, it's bullish, right? And I think we're seeing those lower numbers play out as far as slaughter. That's what I'm really going to be watching here over the next several weeks because, typically we enter a larger slaughter levels here in the fourth quarter. I think seasonally that's going to happen, but we're really going to see how these inventory levels match what we're seeing for slaughter. USDA did not go and revise the March through May pig crop, and I think they could in December because we're already seeing September slaughter levels down 2.4%. That's not what's suggested by that pig crop levels. So that's something really going to, I think, help benchmark where those supplies are at as we continue to watch those slaughter levels and the impact on prices.
And Lee, before I let you go, do you have any marketing or risk management advice that comes to mind when examining this latest report?
Well, with higher prices, that's going to increase risk, but that's certainly can be looked at as a good thing because we're seeing those higher prices. There's a lot of opportunity as we look near term and further out in abilities to really protect a lot of that risk. Profitable prices are really being offered, I think, until as we go on to the fourth quarter of next year. But, that's not to say we won't see further price appreciation. So I think, at minimum, producers need to consider putting a floor on some of these prices through something like a livestock risk protection insurance or purchasing puts. That gives you a little bit of certainty in this market, but also allows for some of the potential upside.
And there you have it from Dr. Lee Schulz. Lee, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Elsewhere in the headlines, global commodity markets have been shaken up coming off the heels of inclement weather in Brazil. This has triggered price spikes over the last several months, and I was joined earlier this week by University of Illinois ag economist Dr. Scott Irwin. We discussed how those numbers are impacting global markets and the potential impacts on domestic markets as we head into harvest.
Well, the biggest impact was in the global feed grain markets because of the late dryness in the last growing season affecting their second crop, safrinha corn yields. And so that's been a major factor in the continuing strength in USDA projections of US corn exports for the current marketing year, because we don't have as much competition coming from Brazil.
So Scott, how are things currently looking in Brazil as they begin planting again?
Well, they had a very dry season, a continuation of the late season last year. It looks like the rains, are coming back. I mean, I think they're starting probably a bit drier than would be normal in lots of areas, but it's too early to say that they're going to have anything other than a normal crop this year in terms of yields. The big story on South America is going to be acreage expansion in response to the high corn and soybean prices, and wheat too.
And of course, the U.S. has had its fair share of flooding and drought this year. How are things looking for corn and soybeans as producers have begun getting into the fields here in the States?
Well, I think it's kind of a mixed bag from what I'm picking up right now. Again, we're in that period where harvest is really across the bulk of the U.S. corn belts really getting rolling. So you have to be careful about what you're hearing from just anecdotal reports. But if I characterize what I'm hearing right now is that maybe the optimism, particularly on corn yields, that we saw just a month or two ago, maybe was slightly overdone. And maybe some of the pessimism in the Western Corn Belt in places like Nebraska was also a bit overdone. So, but on balance, probably keeps us about the same in terms of the U.S. average corn yield is where I'm at right now.
And you mentioned those anecdotal reports. There have been some early murmurings of exceptional crops here in Nebraska with corn and soybeans. What would you consider a bumper crop year, and how would that impact market prices?
Great question. I would define that relative to trend. So there's always among economists a big debate about what the right trend estimate is in any year. I would use something around 178 bushels an acre right now, maybe 177. So it looks to me like we're going to be this year at or maybe slightly to somewhat below trend. So certainly not a bumper crop. So with my trend estimate, you really would need to get a U.S. average corn yield above 180 to begin talking about a bumper crop. And that's not going to happen this year.
Okay, Scott, I'd like to shift gears here a little bit and discuss ethanol production. We had you on the show back in early February to discuss ethanol production and profits in 2020. Have there been any significant gains or losses since the beginning of the year, and what are you keeping an eye on moving forward?
I would say in general, in terms of the physical side of ethanol markets since we last talked, probably not much change. Probably modestly good news since then in terms of the recovery in US gasoline consumption. And since almost every gallon of gas that we use has at least 10% gasoline in it, that's good for ethanol. So we've seen some what I call modest strength as driving has recovered in the United States since we last talked. The really big development is on the policy side, and that's coming out really in just the last few days, where it looks like the Biden administration has done a major U-turn and has turned aggressively negative on RFS mandate levels based on a leaked proposal from last week. So that's probably the biggest thing to watch on the ethanol and biofuel side right now.
And Scott, before we let you go, I'd like to give you the opportunity to discuss any marketing or risk management advice you'd like to impart on our viewers.
Well, my message is really simple and hopefully pretty clear. We are currently at historically very high grain prices, and I continue to think that it's prudent to begin marketing 2022 and, where possible, 2023 crops to some degree at these relatively high price levels. I think with the supply response that the prices are going to prompt globally, I'm not looking for a collapse in grain prices, but it's inevitable if we have normal weather around the world that we're going to see lower prices than we're seeing right now, looking out the next 12 to 24 months. So I think this is a really good marketing opportunity. That's my advice.
Big thanks to Scott for joining us this week. Next week, we'll be joined by Heartland Farm Partners President Jeff Peterson. If you have a question you'd like for us to ask him, please get in touch with us on social media, and I'll be sure to pass that question along. And next up, growing your farm or ranch operation is far more than simply producing the biggest yields or the most pounds. Those who have found financial success in their agricultural operations are more likely to find the success through a balanced management approach. I recently connected with Nebraska Extension agricultural economist Matt Stockton to discuss some of the keys for long-term profitability for farmers and ranchers. A business isn't one single thing. It is in fact a series of events and priorities to be tended to. This is especially true when it comes to the business of agricultural production. Between tending to your crops, livestock, land, and care agreements, there are a multitude of hurdles for producers to clear when seeking profitable outcome from their efforts.
You have this living entity called a business, and you've got to keep it alive and growing so that it survives and does well, and in return, it provides you with a good income. And that's kind of an analogy, but it's also kind of interesting because that's what businesses are in a sense. And so being balanced means you don't just do one thing. In other words, if you're really good at planting corn seeds and really bad at harvesting, that doesn't work. If you're really good at maybe producing corn, but maybe not good at controlling cost, that doesn't. So it's a series of things that you do. A business is a lot of different things, and you have to put together and all those things together, especially in the long run, and make it work. Business is like that. It's kind of like, if you're doing things right, the things that you do right work with other things and make other things easier. And so the effort, and so it builds, you actually get more than you would if you didn't have that synergy. So you want to build your business in such a way that things work together and that you have things put together in such a way that you get as much synergy from that as possible, because it basically amplifies your efforts.
Two types of knowledge that are vital to having a well-balanced operation are technical and actualization. Technical knowledge will be specific to the overall operation, whereas actualization can be a more abstract concept that will require a bit of self-reflection.
But over the years, I've come to realize that the people that are truly successful at business, they know what's going on. They know what's going on with them. They know what their strengths are. They know what their weaknesses are. They know what they need to do to solve the deficit, if there is one. They don't necessarily do everything themselves, but they understand enough to know that this I do well, I can do. This I don't do well, I need help with, and I find somebody to do it with me or for me, or find another way to get it done. And that actualization means that this is the way it is, and you know how to deal with reality, and you kind of know what that is. And that takes effort. So you have to look at it and be realistic and actualize, meaning that you have to recognize what are the things that you can do, what are the things you can't do, and what are the things you need to do, and get those things done one way or the other. And the people that are really successful really understand the reality of what's going on, and they accept the responsibility and solve the problem. So that's actualization.
No matter how much is accomplished within an agricultural operation, it always seems more could be done. It's always important during down periods of the year to evaluate performance of your operation, as well as goal progression and new goals to achieve. Without honest self-evaluation and new goals to strive toward, you may end up as confused as Alice talking with the Cheshire Cat.
Well, in the article that you read that referred you to me, said something about a white rabbit in a Alice in Wonderland. And I really think that describes it really well, because if you don't have a direction, the Cheshire Cat basically says, well, it doesn't really matter which way you go if you really don't know where you're going. And so it's kind of that way with accomplishing things. I mean, if you're farming and you don't know what you want to accomplish as far as your farm or where you want to, what you're trying to do, how are you going to get there? It would be an accident that you got where you wanted to be if you really weren't setting goals or thinking about getting there. You have to do it with forethought and thinking. I mean, purposeful use of materials and time to make it the way you want to make it, and then to keep it that way takes effort and energy. And that's exactly what goals are. They're the things that you're going to do to accomplish the things that you want to accomplish, so that you end up with what you intend to have. If you don't do that, there's no way to get there, unless by accident, which, I guess you could get there by accident, but that would be a really interesting deal. It's probably not going to happen. You know what I mean?
You may have heard the term profit isn't everything, and while that phrase does ring true in some cases, it's also undeniable without sustained profitability, your operation could be subject to financial risk at some point down the road. It's important to keep in mind the unique qualities that define your operation when finding your inlet to profit.
The thing that I think is that profitability, it's kind of like in the beginning, it says profitability isn't everything, but it sure beats a loss. And and that's true. Being profitable isn't the most important thing in the world, because our families are more important. There's a lot of things that are more important but at the same time, without profitability, you're not going to be able to feed your family. You're not going to be able to do some of the things. So the take home is you need to be thinking about what it is you're doing, and that you need to be profitable as you can be given the circumstances you're in. And that's going to be different for everyone, and that your farm cannot be compared to someone else's farm, and that the way you do it's going to be different than what somebody else does. But that if you work at it and think about it, there is a way to be profitable. You just got to find it.
Matt also tells us the idea of looking critically at your operation includes thinking in terms of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Taking time to understand these items can improve overall operational business and personal performance. If you'd like more insight from Matt on the subject, we've included a helpful link on the Market Journal website. And speaking of improving operational business, Kurt and Wayne Kaup of Stewart, Nebraska are passionate about pigs, crops, and soil health. The 2017 Nebraska Leopold Conservation Award winners have combined no-till crops, cover crops, and the manure resources from their hog operation to build soil health, soil fertility, and to conserve the environment. As their hog enterprises have expanded, they continue to care deeply for their farmland and have worked hard to integrate livestock and crop enterprises together to benefit the land and operation. You can learn more about the Kaups in the October issue of Nebraska Farmer. And it's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we've got farmers out in the field right now harvesting their crops, and I'd imagine they're hoping for some good news from you. What can we expect from the weather in the week ahead?
Well, Bill, we did have some excellent harvest activity weather earlier in the week, and then we had to deal with this upper air low trough that was moving from the western United States. It's slowly been crawling across the center part of the country. Pretty significant rainfall to the south of us, and we actually seen some decent rainfall during the Wednesday night period into Thursday morning from the eastern portion of southwest Nebraska into portions of central Nebraska, and then northward up through the I-80 corridor just to the southern edge of the sandhills where from 1 to 3 inches fell. Then we had repeat rounds that occurred Thursday night, Friday, and then we're dealing with some residual precipitation here in the southeastern part of the state. So overall, we can't complain compared to last September when we couldn't hardly get a drop of precipitation across the state for the entire month. So a much better pattern, although we're still dry. We do have more opportunities for precipitation, particularly as we get toward the latter end of the period. So let's take a look at the upper air model. Here's what remains of that upper air low. It's kind of broadening out, and it's expected to cut off. Most of the precipitation with this system will remain to our south, but we can't rule out southeast Nebraska as having the potential for scattered shower activity, particularly as we go through the first half of the day. The more concentrated area of precipitation will remain to the south of us, and then as we go into tomorrow, that trough kind of starts to lift toward the Great Lakes. We do see a little bit of cooling behind that front, so we're going to stay temperatures in the 60s to the low 70s persistently across the eastern half of the state, maybe slightly warmer to the west. And then we'll see the precipitation shield expand over the eastern Corn Belt after all the heavy precipitation that we received during this past week. We're going to see another repeat round of it. For us, high pressure will be firmly in control, and we should start to dry out for the most part across our region, and that will remain persistent throughout the week. Our temperatures are going to remain fairly consistent with around normal temperatures, low 70s, upper 60s consistently. By Tuesday, we will start to see basically the ridge pushing a little bit farther to the east, slight bump up of temperatures, maybe a degree or two, heavy precipitation in the southeast, but an absence of moisture, so we should see some good harvest activity. The upper air low cuts off over the Gulf Coast, and a major trough starts to enter the western United States, but for the center part of the country, high and dry looks to be the word, and we may actually see our temperatures bump up slightly to where we might actually hit the 80-degree mark in the southwest. But by Thursday, that trough starts to make its way into the Pacific Northwest. We'll get a southwest flow aloft, so there should be some drying weather across these central plains at the surface. Our temperatures, once again, will make it up into probably the mid-70s to upper 70s and a few isolated 80s. And as we get into Friday, that trough starts to approach the western United States, the western third of the United States, start to pull up some of that southwest flow ahead of us. So we should see one more good day of harvest activity weather before we start to see some of the influence of this trough moving into our region, and its potential as we get the second half of the weekend for a fairly significant storm system to develop across the northern plains and maybe even bringing some frost into the Dakotas. 8 to 14 day forecast, it takes us from next Thursday through the following Tuesday, shows that warmth pushing toward the Great Lakes, and then we'll see that cold air coming in from the western United States. And in terms of precipitation, very significant moisture across the western United States may have a big influence on the wildfires, putting them out, and we'll start to see that precipitation creeping into our region as we get late into the weekend.
Thanks, Al. That's going to do it for this week's show. And if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, we'll be joined by Heartland Farm Partners President Jeff Peterson for a look at the markets. Plus, UNL Beef Systems Specialist Mary Drunowski gives us some tips on utilizing forage that's high in nitrates. We'll hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Bill Dodd. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.